Previously, on the last days of World War II, in Europe, tensions eased as Soviet troops finally withdrew from the American and British sectors of Berlin. In the Pacific, a massive wave of carrier-borne fighter bombers leveled Japanese airfields. And a mysterious German U-boat, believed to be carrying Nazi war criminals, was found abandoned off the coast of Argentina. This week, under a veil of secrecy, the United States tests the world's first atomic device in the remote desert of New Mexico.
3, 2, 1,
On the outskirts of Berlin, the Allied leaders convene. Truman and Stalin meet face to face for the first time. And in the Pacific, an Allied naval armada begins an all-out bombardment of the Japanese home islands. July the 15th, Belgium. The cruiser USS Augusta docks in Antwerp. Aboard is the President of the United States, Harry Truman. Truman makes a brief stop in Brussels to meet with General Eisenhower. In 24 hours, he will arrive at Potsdam in Germany. Here, at this 18th century estate, in Potsdam's suburbs, about 17 miles from Berlin, Truman will convene with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin.
The Potsdam Conference was a continuation of the negotiations among the great powers, the great Allied powers, U.S., Britain, and the Soviet Union, that had begun at Yalta.
Churchill and Stalin have met several times before, but Truman, who has been in office for just 3 months, will come face to face with the Soviet leader for the first time. The three men will discuss the most pressing issues currently facing the world: the restabilization of post-war Europe and the war against Japan. July 16th, Potsdam. Formal talks between the Allies are set to begin, but Stalin has been delayed, the Soviets claim, by official business. Truman spends the day touring the ruins of Berlin. As he inspects the city, he is stunned by the level of destruction.
I think they were all shocked by the amount of devastation. That the city really, particularly the central parts of the city, were in ruins. Many people had fled, people were living in cellars, people were trying to simply survive as best they could.
His motorcade passes women and children scavenging for food. Countless buildings and homes have been leveled. But as Truman witnesses the damage caused by conventional weapons, he quietly awaits word on the first test of a top-secret bomb capable of destruction on an altogether different scale. July the 16th, Alamogordo, New Mexico. 4 a.m. After 3 years of research and development, scientists involved in the highly classified program to build an atomic weapon, the Manhattan Project, are about an hour away from seeing their creation unleashed. They are to detonate an atomic device. The test is codenamed Trinity. A pair of B-29s circling above the New Mexico desert, 230 miles south of Los Alamos, report that the 30-mile-per-hour winds and heavy rains in the area have abated. The test is on.
The original reaction was that we finally arrived. Here it is. Let's go.
The news is a relief to the military director of the Manhattan Project, Major General Leslie Groves. The head of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves, was a big, tough-talking, no-nonsense Army engineer.
His assistant called him, quote, the worst son of a bitch I ever knew in my life. But that's the kind of man he was, and he made the work happen.
Groves was born in 1896 in Albany, New York. His father was a Presbyterian minister who later became an army chaplain. After studying at the University of Washington and MIT, Groves went on to West Point, where he graduated fourth in his class in 1918. In 1940, Groves was given the task of overseeing the construction of the Pentagon. 2 years later, he was appointed head of what he himself would codename the Manhattan Project, America's top-secret atomic program of which Groves became the driving force.
Groves was a very shadowy figure as far as we were concerned. And that was part of his intention when he addressed various groups, you know, recruits of various kinds. They usually just introduced him as the general in charge of this thing, and they didn't even tell his name, because he didn't want to have his name floating around any wider than necessary.
At first, his aggressive management style upset many of the people under his supervision. Groves, seemingly unconcerned about his popularity, asked those under his charge to do whatever it took to get the job done.
When you got to Los Alamos, you tended to fall into a place that tested the limits of your ability to perform. It was less what you knew in terms of schooling or background, but what could you do? I mean, during the war, you did whatever anybody asked you to do, whatever your background.
Groves' commitment and energy would serve him well. He soon gained the respect of many of the bright minds recruited for the project. In 1942, Groves appointed physicist Robert Oppenheimer as scientific director of the Manhattan Project. The two formed an unlikely but effective partnership. After the war, Groves was chief of the Army Special Weapons Project, retiring in 1948. He entered the corporate world as a vice president of Remington Rand. He died from heart disease in 1970. July the 16th, New Mexico. Today, the world's first plutonium-fueled atomic device, codenamed Gadget, will be detonated. Gadget has been hoisted to the top of a 100-foot steel tower. A 12-foot stack of mattresses has been laid at the base of the tower in case it fell prematurely.
Early in the morning, after a rainstorm that scared everybody because there was thunder and lightning, the bomb was up on a tower. It was like a scene out of a Shakespeare play. They didn't know if lightning might hit the bomb and make the thing go off, so everyone was worried. There were guards at the foot of the tower who knew whether the Germans or the Japanese might come running in and do something.
With the tempest now past, many of Gadget's creators assemble in concrete barracks just 10 miles away. Other observers are positioned up to 20 miles away from the testing site. All wait with bated breath. No one knows for sure just how powerful the explosion will be, or if Gadget will even work.
We were sitting there that very cold morning looking toward where the tower was. We knew where it was. We couldn't see it from 20 miles, but we knew where the tower was, and we had some sense of what the concerns were.
Eager scientists place bets on the magnitude of the impending blast.
I bet 20,000 tons of TNT equivalent on the test shot at Trinity. That was a fairly high bet. I'm a wild gambler. I bet $10. I mean.
But Groves and Oppenheimer are increasingly concerned about the potential effects of nuclear fallout.
Oppie didn't want fallout to happen on some of the villages near the site, so he wanted the wind to be either in the right direction or no wind.
Groves contacts the governor of New Mexico. He warns him that martial law may have to be declared, although he is not at liberty to explain why. 5 a.m. Spectators in the observation bunkers prepare for the detonation.
Everyone was in trenches or lying flat on the ground. They'd been told to face away. They'd been given square pieces of welder's goggle glass to hold before their eyes if they were far enough away to actually look toward the explosion.
I certainly didn't cover my eyes, and I certainly didn't look away. I looked directly at the place where I thought the bomb was going to go, and saw it go.
July the 16th, 5 a.m., New Mexico. Just 30 minutes remain until Gadget, the world's first plutonium bomb, will be detonated. Gadget has been hoisted 100 feet above the desert floor. The moment General Leslie Groves, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, and hundreds more of those working on the Manhattan Project have been waiting for, has finally arrived. 5:29 a.m. The countdown begins.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
5:30 a.m. The sky fills with a brilliant light.
There was this unbelievable light all over the desert. Brighter, someone said later, than 1,000 suns, especially because it had been night. It was as if there were two dawns that morning.
It was awesome enough because, you know, you had to think about the fact that you were 20 miles away, and that all of that at 20 miles, my God, what was it like close in?
A vast fireball climbs into the air. It is visible for 125 miles.
And then it got bigger and darker. It cooled. As it cooled, the color of the exploding material changed from the bright white to yellow to red.
And it swirled and it tore, and this fireball, and it was literally a ball of plasma, of hot gas.
As the spectators watch the events unfold in stunned silence, the fireball disperses, and a mushroom-shaped cloud of black smoke soars 40,000 feet into the air. A thunderous blast follows, shaking the earth with a force previously unknown to man. The steel tower that once held Gadget is vaporized. Only a smoldering crater, 1,000 feet wide and 9 feet deep, remains. The heat generated by the explosion is more intense than the temperature inside the sun. The desert sand melts and fuses into green glass that would be dubbed trinitite.
It was as if someone had opened an oven door from 20 miles away. That's how much heat there was in this fireball that reached them finally.
Gadget's blast is felt throughout southern New Mexico and parts of Texas and Arizona. The world's first atomic device, the equivalent of 18,600 tons of TNT, is successfully detonated.
Everybody was amazed, awed at the power behind this. It was tremendous. Absolutely tremendous.
The people in Los Alamos who were down there for the test were elated. They had been working literally night and day for 2 years. They weren't at all sure that this new invention of theirs was going to work. They were elated to see that it worked. It was, in a certain sense, a very large physics experiment.
But as the reality of what's happened sinks in, some begin to consider the consequences of their creation.
It wasn't like a National Football League, game when people slap each other on the back and jump in each other's arms. Nothing like that. But, we turned to each other and said, well, it was a good shot. It was a good shot. And some of us, certainly me, began to think afterwards, okay, so we've done this. Now what? Most of us thought that the bomb should not be used against a civilian target without giving the Japanese a chance to surrender by seeing it tested.
They were all asked to write their impressions within 24 hours of the test. And one in particular, a very thoughtful Nobel laureate physicist named Isidore Rabi, wrote, "A new thing had been born, a new relationship between man and nature." And he said, "I thought about our little wooden houses back home in Cambridge, Mass, and I was afraid."
Today's successful test in the New Mexico desert marks the dawn of the atomic age. At the turn of the 20th century, Albert Einstein predicted that mass could be converted into energy. John D. Cockcroft and Ernest Walton confirmed this theory experimentally in 1932. 2 years later in London, Leo Szilard, a Hungarian-born refugee from Nazi Germany, discovered that splitting atoms, or fission, would set off a chain reaction, resulting in the release of massive amounts of energy. In December 1942, Enrico Fermi, an Italian physicist who had fled Mussolini's fascist regime, conducted an experiment on a squash court beneath the University of Chicago's football stadium that resulted in the first controlled nuclear chain reaction. Fermi was clear about what his discovery could lead to.
In January 1940, Enrico Fermi at Columbia University took me to the window, one of the top floors, and said, "If this bomb really succeeds, it will destroy such and such a section of New York City at least." He pointed out with his fingers the outline, and I was greatly impressed and scared at the same time.
Alarmed by the destructive potential of atomic energy, Albert Einstein sent a personal letter of warning to President Franklin Roosevelt in 1939. American physicists convinced the government that German scientists were already working on the development of atomic weapons. But it was not until 1942, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, that the US started its own atomic bomb program in New York City, the Manhattan Project. Over the next 4 years, the US government would funnel roughly $2 billion into the Manhattan Project, the equivalent of £11 billion today. Research and development was split between 3 main sites: Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where uranium-235 was produced; Hanford, Washington, where plutonium was generated by nuclear reactors; and Los Alamos, New Mexico, which focused on bomb development. 2 types of atomic weapons were developed simultaneously. One was the U-235 gun type, dubbed Little Boy. The other was the plutonium bomb known as Fat Man, an implosion bomb.
Nobody had ever made anything like that in the world before. Nobody knew whether or not it would work, so we had to test it.
Following the successful test of Gadget, the plutonium atomic device, in New Mexico on July the 16th, 1945, scientists went back to work immediately, building the weapons that would soon shape the course of history. July 16th, New Mexico. The world's first atomic device, the equivalent of nearly 19,000 tons of TNT, has been successfully detonated. After witnessing the unprecedented blast, General Groves is certain he has produced a war-ending weapon. He turns to his deputy and makes a prophetic statement. The war is over. 1 or 2 of those things, and Japan will be finished.
After 3 years of the highest tension, with difficult decisions, dependent to a great extent on theory, our minds were set at rest on July 16th, when the first atomic bomb exploded. It had to be witnessed, to be realized, and it is the universal hope of all present that no American citizen will ever witness it on United States soil again.
Oppenheimer, however, is mortified by what he's just seen. He realizes the profound implications of this new weapon.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Born in 1904 to wealthy German Jewish immigrants, young J. Robert Oppenheimer will become known as the father of the atomic bomb.
He was extremely self-confident, with a great deal of reason to be self-confident.
His stupid hat was always cockeyed coming down, and half the time he was walking like he was in deep thought. If you had the responsibility that guy had on your shoulders, you'd walk in that deep thought also.
Oppenheimer pursued his passion for physics at Harvard University. He went on to receive a doctorate from Germany's distinguished University of Göttingen in 1927. Oppenheimer then returned to the United States and acquired a position teaching physics at the University of California. But it was the discovery of nuclear fission in 1938 that captivated Oppenheimer and led him down the path that would eventually cement his place in history. Early in his career, Oppenheimer had been sympathetic towards communism, and his politics drew the attention of the FBI. In late 1942, despite the misgivings of US intelligence agencies, as well as a few of his fellow scientists, General Leslie Groves asked Oppenheimer to become the scientific director of the Manhattan Project.
He was chosen to direct the laboratory. To everyone's confusion and consternation, he didn't seem like an administrative type at all. But he was also someone who, somewhat insecure in himself, was a great actor. He had a different face for different people. And in a way, this job as lab director was his finest role.
I've known a lot of physicists in my long and checkered career. And I'm not sure I've ever met one that could have pulled off what Oppie did during the war. He had people doing things that didn't compete with each other, but complemented each other.
Working round the clock with some of the brightest scientific minds, Oppenheimer eventually produced the weapon that turned the tides of the war in the Pacific and shifted the balance of power around the world. After the war, he was appointed director of the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. From 1947 until 1952, he headed up the Atomic Energy Commission. But with the Cold War heating up, Oppenheimer's past came back to haunt him. A secret report emerged accusing him of obstructing hydrogen bomb research and alleging a connection to communism in the 1930s. There was no hard evidence to substantiate the claim, but the damage was done. In 1953, at the height of McCarthyism and America's paranoia of communist infiltration, he was designated a security risk and stripped of all security clearances. In 1963, however, his reputation was restored when US President Lyndon Johnson presented him with the Atomic Energy Commission's highest honor, the $50,000 Enrico Fermi Award, for his lasting contribution to theoretical physics and for his outstanding work on the peaceful use of atomic energy. Oppenheimer remained at Princeton until his premature death from throat cancer at the age of 63 in 1967. Following the successful Trinity test, differing views among scientists and soldiers emerge regarding the use of atomic weapons. The primacy of scientific discovery, which once overshadowed everything else, now gives way to moral concerns.
There were a lot of people in the military who weren't keen about the dropping of the atomic bomb, including Dwight D. Eisenhower, who of course was in Europe, but who, really felt Japan was defeated and that this was an unnecessary use of the weapon. But there was no guarantee.
Ultimately, the decision to drop an atomic bomb on Japan will be made by one man, the President of the United States. July 16th, Potsdam, Germany. President Truman receives a coded message from General Groves. The message reads, "Operated on this morning. Diagnosis not yet complete, but results seem satisfactory and already exceed expectations." Truman now knows the Trinity test was a success. He displays little outward emotion.
When he learned that the atomic bomb had successfully been detonated, it probably began to occur to him that the war could be ended quickly.
It had been estimated that Allied casualties from an invasion of Japan would be in the hundreds of thousands. And despite the devastating effects of General Curtis LeMay's incendiary bombing, Truman knows the war in the Pacific could drag on indefinitely, a prospect that has weighed heavily on his mind for months. Upon receiving the news, Truman would remark that the US has an ace in the hole and an ace showing, describing her secret atomic bomb and her public military might. In just 3 days, Truman would approve the production of 20 more plutonium-type bombs. But first, he would come face-to-face with Joseph Stalin.
I don't think he yet knew enough about the atomic bomb, or knew enough to think about it as the fundamentally different kind of weapon that in fact it was, the kind of world-changing weapon. He wasn't yet convinced that the atomic bomb would make the Soviet Union unnecessary to him.
July 17th, Potsdam. Stalin finally arrives at the conference 1 day late. Some believe that Stalin is late not because of official business, as the Soviets claimed, but that he may in fact have suffered a minor heart attack. Others think he is simply trying to upstage other leaders. Over the next several days, Allied leaders will hammer out details for the division of Germany and the fate of refugees from Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Italy. They will also demand the unconditional surrender of Japan. July 18th, Allied leaders hold their second formal session. Truman has informed Churchill of the successful Trinity test. Churchill later wrote, "From that moment, our outlook on the future was transformed." In the eyes of both world leaders, the atomic bomb not only changes the balance of power between the US and Japan, but also the balance of power between Stalin and the West. Churchill and Truman hoped to preempt Soviet imperialism in the Far East by bringing a swift end to the war in the Pacific. Unbeknownst to both men, however, Stalin knows all about Truman's secret weapon. Information about the Manhattan Project had been leaked to the Soviets by German-born physicist Klaus Fuchs, one of the scientists working at the Los Alamos laboratory. Truman will not inform Stalin about the Trinity test for another week. The reaction of the Soviet leader will leave Truman in stunned disbelief. July 20th, Potsdam, Germany. The Allies continue their conference and agree that all Nazi war criminals in custody will be put on trial in the city of Nuremberg, the site of many of Hitler's greatest and most spectacular rallies. Occupation forces in Germany continue to hunt Nazi officials and SS men in anticipation of the trials. The same day, Truman attends a flag-raising ceremony in Berlin. The stars and stripes that flew above the Capitol building in Washington on December the 7th, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor was attacked, is hoisted above US headquarters in Berlin. In his speech, Truman tells Allied occupation forces that the US has no imperial ambitions in Europe or in the Pacific.
Let's not forget that we are fighting for peace and for the welfare of mankind. We're not fighting for conquest. There's not one piece of territory or one thing of a monetary nature that we want out of this war. We want peace and prosperity for the world as a whole.
Far removed from the power struggles unfolding in Berlin, the heavy cruiser USS Indianapolis is about to set sail on a critical mission. July the 15th, San Francisco. Unbeknownst to its captain and crew, the USS Indianapolis is being loaded with the components of an atomic bomb.
All we were told was that we were carrying a secret weapon. The captain didn't even know what it was. The best rumor that I heard on the way across the ocean was that we were carrying 20,000 rolls of scented toilet paper for MacArthur.
After a brief stop at Pearl Harbor, the ship is to proceed to the island of Tinian to make the top-secret delivery.
We were told that every hour that we could save going across the Pacific to the island of Tinian, we could possibly shorten the war by that much.
July 16th, 8 a.m. With nearly 1,200 sailors and Marines on board, the Indianapolis sets sail on the first leg of her voyage. The same day, the Japanese submarine I-58 stealthily pulls away from her moorings in Kure, Japan. In less than 2 weeks, the two ships will cross paths in the waters of the Pacific, resulting in the US Navy's worst disaster at sea. Back in the US, war-weary Americans looking for inspiration find an unsuspecting hero. July the 16th, Audie Murphy, a poor Texas farm boy and highly decorated veteran of the war in Europe, appears on the cover of Life magazine. He is instantly transformed into a national icon. During World War II, an America hungry for heroes turned to Audie Murphy. His courage in combat earned him the respect and admiration of his fellow soldiers and countrymen. Deserted by his father at the age of 10, Murphy was orphaned 6 years later when his mother died. He joined the army at 18 to help support his impoverished siblings. Murphy was posted to the 3rd Infantry Division, which was preparing to invade Sicily and fight its way to Rome. In the ensuing campaign, Murphy proved himself in combat and earned a Bronze Star. On January the 26th, 1945, during the Battle of the Colmar Pocket in eastern France, Murphy's company was attacked by 6 German tanks and 250 infantry. Murphy ordered his men to fall back to the nearby woods. He, however, stayed forward. Directing artillery fire and manning a machine gun, Murphy was wounded in the leg, but killed 50 enemy soldiers. In June, just shy of his 21st birthday, he was awarded the nation's highest award for gallantry in action, the Congressional Medal of Honor. Murphy would receive 33 medals, including 3 Purple Hearts. He returned to his hometown of Farmersville, Texas, a hero. But this July 1945 Life magazine cover would turn him into a national icon. At the urging of James Cagney, Murphy turned his newfound fame into an acting career. He eventually starred in more than 40 films, including the adaptation of his autobiography, To Hell and Back. He would receive the best reviews of his career for his role in The Red Badge of Courage. As the Allies welcome home heroes returning from the European War, halfway around the world, an Allied armada prepares to assault the Japanese home islands. July 15th, the Pacific Ocean. 1,000 US fighters take off from the carrier decks of Task Force 38. The carriers hone in on Hokkaido, Japan's northern island. Aboard the battleship Missouri, overall command of the Allied naval force is held by Admiral William Bull Halsey.
They didn't call him Bull for nothing.
Commander of the largest and most powerful naval group ever to be assembled in the Pacific. The press nicknamed Admiral Halsey Bull because of his tough, aggressive attitude. The son of a naval captain, Halsey was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey in 1882. Trained at Annapolis, he won the Navy Cross, commanding Atlantic destroyer escorts during the First World War. In 1935, at the age of 52, Halsey qualified as a Navy pilot. 3 years later, he was appointed commander of Carrier Group 2 and later promoted vice admiral. Thirsty for revenge after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Halsey led his carrier task force in the Doolittle raid on Japan in 1942. Halsey's mantra was kill Japs, kill more Japs. At the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, he fell for a Japanese ruse and sent part of the US Third Fleet chasing a decoy. Admiral Kincaid's 7th Fleet was left to do most of the fighting and save Halsey's career, although Halsey did destroy 4 Japanese carriers. For Halsey, anything less than Japan's total defeat was unacceptable. July 16th, Halsey's Task Force 38 meets Task Force 37, the British Pacific Fleet. A contingency plan for the impending invasion of Japan is formed. British warships will join the US in a combined air and naval assault. July the 18th, several hundred carrier-borne aircraft take off from Halsey's Third Fleet. Once again, they score several important hits. The most rewarding, the Japanese battleship the Nagato, the largest ship remaining in the Japanese fleet. As the bombardment of Japan from the waters of the Pacific intensifies, the US Army Air Force announces that more than 100 square miles of Japan's cities have been destroyed by bombing raids. July 19th, Japan. Raids of approximately 100 B-29s hit the 4 cities of Choshi, Okazaki, Fukui, and Hitachi, unloading nearly 1,000 tons of incendiaries over each one. For Japanese civilians on the ground, there is no respite from the relentless wave of destruction. A US 5th Air Force intelligence officer has declared the entire population of Japan is a proper military target. There are no civilians in Japan.
Our firebombing was not discriminatory. There was no distinction between industry and civilian residents when we dropped tens of thousands of pounds of firebombs on cities and burned out whole cities, as we had been doing.
It is claimed the raids will spare American lives, shorten the agony which is war, and bring about an enduring peace. The US issues an ultimatum to Japanese Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki: surrender unconditionally or face total destruction and a dictated peace. Japan does not heed this threat. In the midst of the death and devastation, the Japanese Supreme War Council is deadlocked and can still not agree on surrender. A mission aimed at shattering the Japanese will to fight on is now in preparation. July 20th, Tinian Island. The 509th, relocated from their base in Utah, continue their top-secret training over mainland Japan. Flying specially modified B-29s, the crews simulate high-level raids carrying oblong shells, the same shape and weight as the Fat Man atomic bomb. For lack of a better term, they're called pumpkins. Today, 10 of the specially modified planes of the 509th fly pumpkin missions over the Japanese cities of Koriyama, Fukushima, Nagaoka, and Toyama. Before long, these training exercises would draw suspicion and criticism from other B-29 units at Tinian, who have been flying dangerous and non-stop missions over Japan.
There was a lot of not-so-good-natured ribbing of the 509th, which had its own special place on the island and its own special privileges on the island. This, after all, was the base for another 2,000, some number like that, crews that were living under considerably harder conditions than the 509th.
The rest of the B-29s there, every night or every other night, they were on their way to the Empire dropping incendiary bombs and all that. And they'd come back, and here is the fancy gold-plated airplanes, the 509 still sitting there.
At its peak, the 509th had a total strength of 225 officers and 1,542 enlisted men, all working under a veil of secrecy. Despite the disparagement, the pilots continue their cryptic drills over Japan. They have still not been told what their true purpose is or when they will be called into action.
Tibbets made it crystal clear, you people are on a special mission. Don't necessarily ask me what it is. It's very important, and he even went so far, he says, I think what we're going to do is end the war. And from a security point of view, he was absolutely forbidden to tell them what their ultimate experience was going to be.
Next, on the last days of World War II, in Europe, President Truman makes the call. The atomic bomb will be used against Japan.
The final release message that we got from Washington said, we released it to you to use, but not before the 2nd of August.
In the US, a plane crashes into the Empire State Building, causing panic on the streets of New York City. And in the Pacific, the USS Indianapolis will continue its long and dangerous voyage across the Pacific, rushing at full speed towards her tragic fate.
There were 1,197 men aboard the ship. We ended up with only 317 survivors 5 days later.